So, welcome everybody. Day 16 of this fantastic book, Change Your Question, Change Your Life. Chapter 10 Q Storming to the Rescue. With less than half an hour to get ready for my appointment with Charles, I focused on the three questions Joseph had given me that morning. What assumptions am I making? How else might I think about this? And what is the other person thinking, feeling, and wanting? Then my secretary buzzed, announcing Charles' arrival. In the past, I would have kept him waiting. Today, I immediately got up and met him at the door. We shook hands, and I asked him how he was doing. He replied that he was fine, but he looked a little nervous. At least I wasn't the only one. When I originally made the appointment with him, I've been all set for a showdown. But that was before my meetings with Joseph. Since then, my perspective on the problems between us had changed considerably. I offered him a comfortable chair and asked if he'd like a coffee or anything to drink. That must have surprised him because I'd never done that in the past. He thanked me but said he was fine, holding up a small bottle of water he'd brought along. Yesterday, while thinking about this meeting, I had reviewed many of the things I had learned from Joseph. I also considered details about how both Joseph and Alexa conducted their meetings with us. They had both asked lots of questions, but they also had a certain way of speaking that put me at ease. I felt they were always on my side, like they wanted me to succeed. When I thought about it, I realized that each of them made our meetings a learner experience. I'd recalled, for example, that Joseph made sure there wasn't a desk or other physical barriers between us. This always had the effect of putting me at ease, so I decided to try the same thing with Charles. With so much at stake, I wanted to take every opportunity to make this conversation successful. The slide, I slid my desk chair over so that Charles and I were sitting just feet apart near the window. He looked a bit apprehensive at first, but seemed to grow a little more at ease as we went along. I'm worried about how our team is doing, I began. In fact, we are really in trouble. So I'd like to talk some things through with you. And if it's okay, we can start with a few questions. Charles stared back at me with a slightly worried expression, nodding slowly. Let me be quite candid with you. I continued, trying to think how Joseph would say this. I've realized that I may have contributed to some of the problems we've been having with our team. I want to change that. And I believe the place to start is with you and me. I paused, checking out Charles' reaction. As far as I could tell, he was attentive and engaged. Though he didn't look very relaxed, when I put myself in his place, it was easy to imagine what might be going through his mind. I continued. I have made certain judgments about you that I now believe were a wrong interpretation. For example, I knew you've been at QTech for several years and that you were in line for the job that was given to me. I'm pretty sure my arrival wasn't exactly good news for you, and I assume you've had trouble working under me. Am I right about this? Charles nodded. I've got to confess that has been difficult. Alexa broke it to me gently though, but that only goes so far. His response surprised me. Had he already recognized the problem and had he actually been working on it, it appeared so. For a moment, I got defensive and guarded, thinking that if it were so, maybe he should have gotten my job. Had the situation been reversed, I'd been happy. I'd have been pretty bent out of shape myself, I said. I'm still working on it, Charles admitted. Let me ask you this. How am I doing? Considering that I put an awful lot off on you that really didn't belong on your shoulders. I think you're doing great. I'm not sure I understand, Charles asked. It wasn't easy saying what I did after that. I made a few assumptions about you, Charles. First, I assumed that because I was brought in over you, that you'd resent me and wouldn't be able to work with me. I realized I was judging you unfairly. I realized I was judging you unfairly. My second assumption had to do with all those questions you asked in our meeting. My questions? Charles looked totally bewildered, then gathered his thoughts enough to say, I don't get it. Why would my questions be a problem? You are the new guy. I need to find out what you want, where you're going to take us. How else would I find out what I don't know if I don't ask? Important, very important line. How else would I find out what I don't know if I don't ask? So it's very important for us and clarify what is there. Because, in the start of the chapter, Ben very nicely said, my perspective with the involvement or with the meetings with Joseph, my perspective changed about Charles, his assistant. Now, how does this work? आप जब भी किसी मीटिंग में, जब भी किसी एक you go to meet somebody, you go to have an official meeting, you always go with the perception कि वहां ऐसे ऐसे होगा, मैं ऐसे ऐसे होगा और मैं ये करूंगा. Okay, and you are just looking for those triggers so that you are able to execute whatever it is there in your mind. 90 to 95% that happens. We are just looking for the triggers in order to complete what we have imagined and visualized in our mind. That is a very strong statement because you are not now open to whatever possibilities are possible. So you are approaching the meeting with a very tight lens where you are only looking for those triggers and not letting to see what else is possible in your entire panorama which is in front of you. But when your perception is different, when you're open for possibilities, that is where the whole situation, which was earlier a channeled view, looking for those triggers, is now open for receiving. Because अब वो ऐनक नहीं है. You can look in all directions, up, down, left, right. You are not just concentrating on the triggers which are running in your mind in order for you to complete whatever you have thought about. So that's exactly what changed for Ben when he approached this meeting. And as a physical sign, if you read between the lines, as physical signs, he did not do all those things that he used to do earlier. That means he was committed to change. Your actions will speak 1,000 words. And when you are in that same scenario, same person, similar meeting, if you change your old actions, that is it's a reinforcement on you towards the change that you want now, towards the change that you desire now. So when he said, earlier I would make him wait, this time I went head on. First action, commitment to change, open for new possibilities. Second, हम हमेशा टेबल के अक्रॉस बैठते थे. I did not want that, and I learned it from Joseph that we need to be facing each other without any obstruction in between. He did that. Charles got a bit uncomfortable at first, but then he also realized this is a different person now. So your actions are very important when you're looking for a breakthrough. Because अगर आप old perspective से old actions में ही रहोगे, no matter how you say I've read this book, I want to change my questions, till the time it does not come in your day-to-day actions of wanting you to change the things, change the perspective, chances are, even if you do it once or twice, you will get back to what you were earlier. But if you make those uncomfortable changes or desirable changes, which you were not doing earlier, that will reinforce it again that you are now open for possibilities. You are now open to what is it that you can now, in this empowered situation, learn and be on the learner's mindset. And you have now made a conscious effort to drop that judger mindset, which had that action activities, which is not a part of you now. So when it is accompanied with your actions, वहां पे एक major shift change होता है. So whenever next you are in that situation which was uncomfortable and you catch yourself in the judger again and again in that particular situation, start taking different actions so that you are able to sense that, yes, I am willing to change. Because it's very easy to say I'm willing to change, but very difficult towards working towards change. And my friends, these are two different worlds. The first world, you are willing to change. A lot of people are. Second world, I am working towards the change. That's the choice you need to make. And the most important part in working towards the change is you have to change your actions, because that action is going to speak louder than 1,000 words you're going to say. It's going to be much more powerful than whatever questions you have in mind, because your perception now is of a different notion that you want to be in that learner mindset. So focus on working towards change and not wanting change. Oh, I agree, I said. I wasn't ready to admit to him that I had thought his questions were aimed at showing others on the team that I didn't have all the right answers. However, I did tell him that my job at QTech required a huge shift from the way I was accustomed to operating. At my old company, I explained, people came to me for answers. I was so good at it that I earned a sterling reputation as the answer man. Here at QTech, I am heading up a team and I needed other people who help me find answers. Charles took a sip of water from his bottle, then said, a few weeks before you came aboard, Alexa brought in this guy for a training session. It was about just this sort of thing, about questions and answers. He talked about the powerful impact of questions. How can they help us be more innovative and change our thinking, our relationships, and even an entire organization? He asked us how anyone could expect to get the best answers without first asking the best questions. One thing he said stands out in my memory. It was, great results begin with great questions. I remembered Alexa telling me about that training the day she hired me. She explained how she was having Joseph come in to facilitate a core training on question thinking. She invited me to attend, but I had a scheduling conflict and couldn't make it. Besides, I was the answer man. Questions didn't much entrust me back then. That had been the first reference she ever made to Joseph, and since I hadn't yet met him, his name hadn't meant much to me. There was no doubt in my mind that Charles was describing Joseph's training. So it seemed safe to assume he also had some familiarity with question thinking and the learner and judger mindset material. When he finished talking, I told Charles I had a question for him. Sure, he said. How do we get past what's been blocking us and our team? I asked. This was a question I came up with in my preparation for the meeting. As you know, it's the 11th hour for our project. If we don't get the dime and move forward, we are up the creek. In particular, what do you need to help us be successful? For a moment, Charles seemed taken aback. Then he said, I am not sure I have an immediate answer, but I'll think about it. However, I am sure that whatever we are doing in this conversation is a whole lot better than it has been. It seems like a good direction. He paused and added, May I make a suggestion? I think I've got something that could be helpful to us. My hackles went up. Here he goes again, I thought. He's going to challenge my authority. But I stopped myself quickly. In an instant, three self cues popped into my mind. Am I in judger? How else can I think about this? What do I want to accomplish in this meeting? I knew that if I wanted to clear the air with Charles and get the team moving forward, I had to let go of my old assumptions. Everything's dependent on it. I'm all ears, I said. It's something Joseph showed us, Charles said. He called it Q storming. At that moment, you could have knocked me over with a feather. Just the day before, I would have done anything to shut Charles down. Today, I just said, Tell me about it. Charles got up and went over to the flip chart that had become a permanent fixture in my office and picked up a blue felt tip marker. The goal, he explained, is not to come up with answers, ideas, or suggestions. Instead, we want to come up with as many new questions as possible. Just throw out questions as fast as we can. When I write them down, in other words, with no response or discussions in between, I guess, exactly. Joseph said the goal is to open new door in our minds. Like behind every door, we might find another answer or solution. Every new question just expands our range of possibilities. I think his exact words were, a question not asked is a door not opened. A question not asked is a door not opened. So it's very important to do this practice. We will be discussing the details of Q storming or whatever is the best available in this book. But the whole concept of Q storming is sort of like brainstorming, but everything has to be from a perspective of question. And then once you get onto all the questions, you will ensure that all the doors of possibilities have now been touched upon by those questions, by yourself, by your team members, by your family members, or whatever is it that you're working on. Because everybody in life will have and will continue to have a different point of view. Not everybody is the same. Not everybody will be the same. Because everybody has a different fingerprint. That's the uniqueness of a human being. So it is not that you are right or your point of view is right, or the other is wrong, or the other person's point of view is wrong. The whole question is everybody is unique and has a different point of view. And when all unique people, different people get together in terms of storming towards making or asking the most appropriate questions as per that situation, that remains no door opened for the door of possibilities that are now available. You always start by describing the problematic situation and your goals for change, Charles explained. After that, you figure out what assumptions you have about the situation. You mean like the assumption I made that you had trouble working with me, I said? Charles screamed, but then nodded. Once you've got your goals and assumptions clarified, you start brainstorming new questions. For example, you might ask, how can we work together to meet our targets? He wrote that question on the flip chart. After that, he immediately added another question. What do I want to change about the team? What don't we want to change? I exclaimed. Joseph says the secret of successful queue storming is to stay in learner and be careful about how you phrase the questions. Charles continued. If we were to get results we are seeking, the question needs to be in first person. In other words, asking in terms of I or we. Okay. I said, you mean like, what would I like to see happen that isn't happening now? How can we all listen better? What can I do to be more creative? Great questions, Charles said, writing as fast as he could and underlying all the I's and V's. I am not sure where it came from, but right after he said this, a new question popped out of my mouth. How can I keep the communication channels open between you and me and our team members? I thought I saw Charles smile, but he didn't say anything, just wrote my last question on the flip chart. Then he added another of his own. How can I keep asking the right kind of questions? How do we state our goals better so everybody can be more aligned and inspired? Charles added. Exactly. Let's keep going. More questions, Charles exclaimed. He continued to jot them down on the flip chart, scrawling them out with a blue felt tip pen. What kind of fuel can I bring to keep our team running? How do I keep from being judgmental? How do I define responsibilities for each team member? How do we make sure we all follow through on all our promises? How can I assure each member it's okay to ask for help? We both fired off questions in rapid succession. I was surprised at how naturally and easily Charles and I were working together. In no time, we had 4 sheets covered with questions, and they were all over the floor. Finally, I suggested we stop and review what we've done. Charles stepped back from the flip chart and said, Joseph explained that it was important to notice if there are any questions we hadn't asked before. The new questions can make the biggest difference. I quickly looked over the list on the flip chart and shuffled through the sheet of questions on the floor. Yes, quite a few, I admitted, frankly, startled at how many I really hadn't asked. Charles and I stood in front of the flip chart and then taped the other sheets up on the wall. We spent the next half hour looking over all our questions and adding new ones here and there. As we began discussing them, I got clearer about why we'd been stuck and what would help us change. Seeing all those questions written down helped me look at my present situation more objectively. Queue storming allowed me to see the possibilities beyond what I otherwise would have ever come up with. I remembered Alexa's story about her big breakthrough, how changing the kinds of questions she asked had changed the whole company. I was getting an inkling of how that could happen for us as well. Charles was copying our questions into a notebook for later reference. I perched on the edge of my desk, staring at the flip chart. I think I have a question to add to your list, I said. I went up to the chart, turned to a new sheet, and wrote, "What will help each of us make our best contribution?" Nice, Charles said, nodding. That word, contribution, suddenly became the central focus of my attention. In my zeal to assert my old role as the answer man, I had hardly ever asked questions such as, what do other people have to offer? What do they need and want? What is my effect on them? I saw even more deeply how the failure of the team I used to call a nightmare, had been me. I had been the problem all along. I think I could spend the next few hours discussing what we've just accomplished here. I said, but do you know what's the most valuable lesson for me in all of this? Charles shook his head. First, there was a great demonstration that questions have the power to open things up and maybe even turn things around. I can imagine using Q storming with the team, and as soon as possible, second, I've got a whole new perspective on the ways that questions can help us better appreciate and understand the people around us. These revelations were opening another very big door for me with a new question coming into sharp focus. Am I willing to allow others to contribute to me? Ben, Charles said, before this meeting, I wasn't at all sure I would be able to stay on here at QTech. To tell the truth, working with you had started feeling like it was more trouble than it was worth. That's painful, huh? I felt my face break into an embarrassed grin, then I just laughed out loud. I sympathize with you entirely, I said, warmly extending my hand to him. We had made our peace. In the process, I had made a breakthrough I've been looking for, and changing my questions had been the pivot that made the difference. I could hardly wait to tell Joseph what had happened. After Charles left my office, I went back to the flip chart and started blocking out plans for meeting with our teams the following morning. This time, I wanted to have the right questions to create a learner environment. I sat down at my desk, pulled out my notes from my meetings with Joseph, and began thumbing through them. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the light placard on the wall. Question everything. Yes, I thought Joseph was right. It all seemed so simple now, right? Simple like Einstein's theory of relativity. Tool number 9, the homework for today, create breakthroughs with Q storming. See chapter 10, Q storming to the rescue, pages 127 to 128. The purpose of this tool is to facilitate collaborative, creative, and strategic thinking that can lead to more successful results. Discussion. Joseph introduced the term Q storming to Ben and suggests that he asked Alaska about it. Since she's used this practice so effectively, Ben learns how to do Q storming from Charles, and it contributes to a breakthrough for Ben and his eventual success. Q storming is most often used when breakthroughs are sought in decision making, problem solving, strategic planning, and innovation. It is a tool for moving beyond limitations in perception and thinking and advancing to novel and extraordinary solutions and answers. While Q storming is akin to brainstorming, the goal of this question thinking practice is to generate as many questions as possible. The expectation is that some of these questions will provide desired new openings or directions. Typically, questions open thinking while answers often close thinking. Q-storming is based on three premises. Great results begin with great questions. Number two, most any problem can be solved with enough of the right questions. Number three, the questions we ask ourselves often provide the most fruitful openings for new thinking and possibilities. Q-storming is typically done with a group or team, especially when exploring ideas and possibilities. It is also used in goal-oriented conversations between two people, for example, in coaching, leadership, management, or sales. Q-storming can be done in person or virtually, say with a global team or a coaching client in different geographic locations. The facilitator focuses on developing a robust goal and eliciting assumptions about it prior to the question generation phase of Q-storming. Often at the end, the action plans will be made or revised based on discoveries made through the Q-storming sessions. Question guidelines. Questions should be first person, singular or plural, using I and we. You want new questions to think with, not necessary to ask someone else. Generate questions from learner mindset and avoid judger. Questions are mostly open-ended, not closed. How can I, rather than can I? And how can we, rather than can you? Invite courageous and proactive as well as silly and dumb questions. Note, Q-storming is a powerful tool for creative thinking and you are welcome to experiment with it. However, mastery with facilitating Q-storming sessions, especially with groups or communities facing complex or challenging issues, is best supported by professional training. You can find more information about Q-storming and Q-storming training programs at www.inquiryinstitute.com.